The forensic audit of this specific institutional collision initiates by mapping the absolute physical parameters of room 226, located within the Dirksen Senate Office Building. The system logs that this specific geographic coordinate historically functions as a highly controlled theatrical stage, engineered for partisan performances and manufactured outrage. However, the environmental data indicates a massive structural deviation on this specific morning. The official operational agenda displayed in the room reads transparency and accountability in the intelligence community, a standard sequence of vocabulary that structurally weaponizes the atmosphere when directed at an operator whose entire federal career relies on manipulating those exact terms. The optical sensors track the physical entry of the primary target, Senator Adam Schiff. He breaches the perimeter of the hearing room exactly 14 chronological minutes prior to the commencement of the administrative sequence. The forensic lens analyzes his physical inventory and behavioral metrics. He executes the entry with the kinetic rhythm of a biological subject who mathematically assumes the entire institutional apparatus belongs strictly to him. He is physically flanked by a highly specialized unit of defense attorneys and communications operatives. His visual aesthetic is hyper-calculated. The system logs the deployment of a specific pale blue tie, optimized explicitly to register favorably under the rigid overhead lighting architecture of the Senate chamber. He carries a heavy, tabbed physical binder containing pre-approved, highly polished acoustic statements designed to project absolute institutional authority without ever exposing the operator to actual structural danger. Exactly 47 distinct camera units are mechanically locked onto his coordinate from every possible geometric angle known to the Washington media grid. The optical network includes standard wide shots, localized overhead angles, and highly intrusive network close-ups. Schiff physically occupies the witness chair, mechanically adjusts his acoustic microphone, opens the prepared binder, and elevates his optical focus to the central administrative desk. This is the exact microsecond the target's pre-calculated operational algorithm encounters a terminal anomaly. The biological subject occupying the primary chairman's coordinate is J.D. Vance, the Vice President of the United States. The forensic system logs the extreme statistical improbability of this deployment. The Vice President mathematically does not preside over standard committee hearings. Every active political operator inside room 226 instantly processes the structural weight of this physical presence. Vance's deployment is strictly not a ceremonial cameo, engineered for an optical headline. It is a deliberate, highly pressurized mechanical trap. The optical feed analyzes the target's immediate biological reaction. Schiff's facial architecture remains structurally rigid, as highly trained political operators are programmed to suppress visible kinetic shock. However, his optical sensors rapidly scan the physical desk stationed directly in front of the Vice President, searching for the standard Washington inventory. The system measures the absolute contrast between the two horizontal surfaces. On Schiff's side, nervous attorneys, heavy binders, and constant physical adjustment. On Vance's side, 0 visible talking points, 0 stacks of disorganized folders, 0 auxiliary staff members feeding him paper, and 0 performative mess. There is mathematically nothing on the chairman's desk except 1 untouched glass of water and 1 closed leather briefcase. Schiff executes a rapid physical lean toward his primary legal counsel, transmitting an acoustic signal too low for the active microphones to successfully capture. The defense attorney responds with a physical shrug. The exact mechanical gesture a highly compensated legal operative deploys when the system presents a catastrophic variable that capital expenditures cannot instantly neutralize. The administrative sequence formally initiates. The chairman outputs standard procedural vocabulary to establish the baseline record, then systematically transfers the acoustic floor to Schiff. The forensic chronometer logs this as the exact coordinate where Schiff independently initiates his own structural collapse. Operating strictly under the assumption that he retains optical control of the room, Schiff activates his polished vocal cadence. He thanks the committee, notes the specific structural privilege of the vice president's presence, and then deliberately steps completely off the pre-approved text. He acoustically deploys a hillbilly elegy remark directly at Vance. The system categorizes this output as a sociological insult engineered to function as sophisticated political wit. The acoustic sensors register a localized, low-frequency ripple of laughter strictly from the Democratic sector of the room. The forensic system isolates Vance's physical response to the incoming acoustic strike. The measurement is mathematically zero. He does not execute a performative smile, he does not flinch, and he completely bypasses the standard protocol of manufacturing theatrical offense. The insult mathematically fails to alter his operational trajectory because the vice president has already bypassed the concept of political theater and is actively transitioning into the physical documentation phase. Vance's right hand executes a controlled physical movement toward the leather briefcase. The acoustic sensors capture two distinct sharp brass clicks as the physical latches mechanically disengage. The frequency of these two metallic sounds violently alters the atmospheric pressure inside room 226. The hearing permanently ceases to function as a public performance and structurally transforms into an absolute forensic inventory. The briefcase opens. The optical feed logs exactly 5 physical tabs stationed inside the container: red, blue, yellow, green, and white. Each individual tab is marked with calm, deliberate, handwritten text. The system confirms this is not the physical inventory of a biological subject who arrived to react to a television moment. It is the exact architecture of an auditor who arrives strictly to proceed with an institutional dissection. The forensic audit tracks the exact microsecond the physical parameters of the hearing transition from preliminary procedures into direct evidentiary extraction. Vice President J.D. Vance acknowledges Senator Adam Schiff's opening statement, outputting an acoustic transmission that is mathematically devoid of warmth and strictly engineered to formally mark the official record. He deploys a precise transition sentence, stating that before the committee proceeds to the prepared testimony, he must structurally note a specific data point for the permanent record. The system logs that this specific phrase lands in the acoustic space with the mechanical weight of a primary structural nail being driven directly into a board. Vance's right hand physically interacts with the first partition inside the leather briefcase, the red tab. He mechanically extracts a single sheet of paper. The optical feed locks onto the document as Vance officially logs the parameters of the House censure vote directly into the Senate's acoustic space. He mathematically establishes the historical coordinate where the House of Representatives formally censured Adam Schiff for actively misleading the American public. The system notes the structural efficiency of this maneuver. Vance systematically drags the exact professional history that polite Washington operators typically ignore straight into the center of the current proceeding. He introduces a comparative historical metric, physically referencing Charlie Rangel and verified tax fraud, allowing the structural comparison to materialize in the room without artificially overplaying the vocal delivery. Vance establishes the absolute baseline rule of the audit. When a biological subject approaches the Senate presenting himself as a verified expert on transparency and accountability, the civilian public is mathematically entitled to process his entire operational record, particularly the specific variables the witness has historically attempted to bury. The forensic optical sensors isolate Schiff's physical reaction to this initial breach. The performative smile that had previously occupied his facial architecture is systematically terminated. The system logs that the expression does not fade gradually or soften into a posture of dignified concern. It disappears with the absolute mechanical suddenness of an electrical light being switched off inside a room where an operator has just realized the primary exit door is physically locked. Beneath the mahogany table, out of direct optical range of the primary cameras, Schiff's physical hand violently tightens its grip. His lead defense attorney executes a kinetic lean toward his target, attempting to transmit an acoustic whisper, but Schiff immediately waves him off with a sharp, rigid physical gesture. This specific microscopic movement mathematically indicates that the target still structurally believes he retains the operational capacity to manage the incoming data. Vance does not pause to process the target's internal calculations. He immediately advances the chronological timeline to September 26, 2019. He physically extracts two distinct documents from the red tab and places them side by side on the horizontal plane of his desk. The forensic system logs the absolute structural contrast between these two pieces of paper. Document A is the actual declassified rough transcript of the highly scrutinized telephone transmission between President Donald Trump and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. Document B contains the exact sequence of words Schiff had physically read aloud into an active microphone on national television. Vance acoustically reads the invented language directly from Document B. He explicitly isolates the exaggerated, highly theatrical lines regarding the manufacturing of political dirt. The system logs the absolute mathematical reality of the comparison. The specific sequence of words Schiff broadcast to the public mathematically did not appear anywhere within the actual declassified transcript. The vocabulary was not a direct quotation, it was not an approximate translation, and it was not a standard paraphrase. It existed strictly inside a political narrative that Schiff had deliberately broadcast using the structural lighting of an official congressional proceeding. The acoustic sensors capture Schiff physically leaning toward his microphone. The system classifies this movement as a deeply ingrained survival reflex. It is the exact mechanical reflex of an operator highly trained to surround every direct query with a dense layer of rhetorical fog, engineering a response where allies can identify context and critics can be accused of missing nuance. Schiff activates his microphone and outputs his established defensive algorithm. He states that his televised remarks were structurally meant at least in part as parody, functioning strictly as a characterization of the essence of the call. The system logs this output as the standard Washington escape hatch, a structural trapdoor that only mechanically opens after a public performance catastrophically fails and external operators begin verifying the raw transcripts. Vance physically refuses to elevate his acoustic volume to combat this defense. The forensic system notes that this calculated lack of anger severely damages Schiff's operational capacity because absolute calm provides the target with absolutely zero emotional energy to push back against. Vance systematically dismantles the parody defense by locking it to a rigid chronological timeline. He inputs the verified data that Schiff mathematically did not deploy the parody label until after Congressman Mike Turner physically confronted him regarding the fabricated text. The defense was only activated after the structural anomaly had already been exposed in the room. Vance notes for the record that this sequence mathematically invalidates the definition of parody. It was not a satirical performance delivered with a visible optical wink, and it was not pre-labeled as a joke. It was a highly deliberate political fabrication pushed directly through the institutional machinery of congressional credibility. To permanently seal the red tab, Vance extracts the terminal piece of physical evidence. He produces an internal staff memorandum retrieved directly from the target's own operational network. The system logs the chronological timestamp on this document. It was authored exactly 2 days prior to Schiff's televised performance. Vance reads the two critical phrases physically printed on the paper: maximum narrative impact and legal defensibility. The forensic system analyzes the mechanical weight of these specific alphanumeric sequences. The phrase maximum narrative impact is mathematically never utilized by a human operator attempting to execute a simple, harmless joke. The phrase legal defensibility is strictly the mechanical vocabulary of an operational team that mathematically understands it is actively walking an extremely dangerous legal edge, fully recognizes the public value of a distorted performance, and is systematically preparing an artificial defense grid in case the entire stunt collapses under external scrutiny. Schiff attempts to trigger a secondary defense mechanism. He attempts to acoustically question the physical document itself, suggesting he had never visually processed it, reaching for the standard institutional defense of denial by administrative distance. Vance mathematically refuses to chase the side trail. He does not engage in a peripheral debate regarding office routing procedures. He physically closes the red tab, executing the motion with the absolute cool finality of an auditor, successfully logging the first count of a structural indictment. Vance outputs the final diagnostic summary of the red tab coordinate, translating the complex procedural data into a single, highly efficient acoustic transmission. The former chairman systematically fabricated testimony on live television and then attempted to classify the event as a joke, strictly after being mechanically caught. The system logs this sequence as complete, noting that the sheer brutality of the red tab derived entirely from the mathematical reality that it was merely the opening exhibit in a much larger structural collapse. The forensic audit monitors the exact physical sequence as Vice President J.D. Vance permanently terminates his interaction with the red tab, systematically realigning his optical and kinetic focus onto the second partition stationed inside the leather briefcase, the blue tab. The system logs that this specific physical transition marks a severe escalation in the structural parameters of the hearing. The red tab had successfully neutralized the target's immediate credibility regarding a single televised event, but the blue tab is mathematically engineered to completely dismantle a multi-year, highly saturated public architecture. Vance's right hand extracts a dense stack of physical documents from the blue partition. He officially logs the central operational subject directly into the Senate's acoustic space, the Russia collusion narrative. The system classifies this specific narrative not as a standard political disagreement, but as the primary operational matrix that Senator Adam Schiff had systematically utilized for multiple chronological years to command optical supremacy across the federal media network. Vance initiates the extraction sequence by laying out a rigid, mathematically verified map of Schiff's public transmissions. He explicitly identifies the primary transmission vectors, citing specific optical broadcasts originating from the CNN corporate network, the MSNBC network, and the ABC network. The forensic system tracks the endless structural variations of the exact same insinuation deployed across these channels. Schiff had continuously and mechanically outputted the claim that direct evidence of collusion existed, that this specific evidence was physically visible to his operational team, that the data was mathematically significant, and that he inherently possessed secure access to a verified truth that ordinary American citizens were simply too uninformed to process. To completely strip the target of any standard political defense, Vance inputs a precise mathematical parameter directly into the permanent record. He logs exactly 41 separate, highly documented occasions. He then establishes the exact temporal boundary for these occurrences, a continuous 26-month chronological cycle. The forensic system halts the timeline to explicitly define the structural weight of the number 41. Vance mechanically confirms for the room that 41 identical public transmissions completely bypass the established parameters of a biological operational error. It mathematically cannot be classified as a single operational slip. It structurally cannot be dismissed as one bad day on the calendar. It is not the result of one overheated acoustic interview, nor does it qualify as an offhand phrase that was unfairly clipped by hostile political entities searching for ammunition. Vance's acoustic delivery structurally defines the metric. 41 times is mathematically a method. It is a highly calibrated campaign. It functions strictly as a deliberate public architecture, built brick by physical brick, until millions of American biological subjects were systematically instructed to live inside a specific narrative framework that the official federal investigations later completely failed to mathematically prove. Vance then introduces the terminal countermetric to the desk. He physically extracts the official, authorized conclusion authored directly by special counsel Robert Mueller. The system notes that Schiff and his allied operators had historically spent massive amounts of optical energy attempting to systematically bury this exact conclusion beneath dense paragraphs of emotional footnotes and partisan formatting. Vance completely bypasses the emotional shielding. He executes a direct acoustic read of the unalterable sentence straight into the live microphone. The investigation did not establish that members of the Trump campaign conspired or coordinated with the Russian government. To maximize the structural damage, Vance layers a secondary institutional variable onto the mahogany table. He introduces the formal, verified conclusions of the Durham probe. He explicitly reads the data, confirming that the intelligence forming the absolute foundation of the original federal probe was structurally raw, completely unanalyzed, and inherently uncorroborated. The forensic system logs the optical shift in the room. This specific sequence of documented facts permanently converts years of highly polished cable news certainty into documented political malpractice wearing a flag pin. The optical sensors immediately track Schiff's biological and acoustic response to this structural collapse. The target actively attempts to execute a standard kinetic pivot. He reaches for secondary vocabulary, attempting to shift the operational focus away from the verified legal conclusion and directly toward vague contacts, atmospheric smoke, and generalized clouds of suspicion. The system classifies this as a mechanical evasion tactic, a well-documented survival mechanism that allows an operator to acoustically imply guilt without ever supplying the verified physical proof required to substantiate it. Vance mathematically neutralizes the pivot mechanism. He does not execute a theatrical acoustic escalation. He absolutely refuses to increase his vocal volume, and he deploys zero visible optical outrage. He simply executes a rigid, highly disciplined mechanical loop. He reads the exact same special counsel sentence into the microphone a second time. He simply repeats the text exactly as it was physically written. The forensic system analyzes the absolute efficiency of this specific maneuver. Vance mathematically proves that the cleanest, most structurally devastating method to permanently destroy a political narrative built entirely on insinuation is to systematically force the target to sit in absolute silence while the verified institutional conclusion is read out loud. The system logs why Schiff is permanently trapped within this coordinate. He maintains the theoretical capacity to acoustically mock Vance's geographic background. He retains the ability to sneer at his opponent. He possesses the vocabulary to artificially label the entire proceeding as a partisan fever dream. However, he mathematically cannot pretend that the exculpatory sentence originated from Vance. The exact alphanumeric sequence belonged strictly to Robert Mueller. Schiff is structurally pinned against the absolute hard surface of the institutional record, and the optical feed confirms his defensive grid has completely failed to process the incoming data. The forensic system maintains its absolute optical lock on the mahogany table as Vice President J.D. Vance executes a secondary physical extraction from the blue partition. The system logs the kinetic properties of this specific document. It is physically thicker than the previous exhibits, secured by a metallic clip, and structurally engineered to move the federal accusation from the realm of public optical exaggeration directly into the highly restricted coordinate of private internal knowledge. Vance places the document onto the surface, transitioning the audit from measuring what Senator Adam Schiff had acoustically broadcast on television to measuring exactly what his own internal security apparatus had officially warned him about in private. Vance reads the alphanumeric sequence of the legal advisory into the active microphone. The text physically states that a comprehensive structural review of the highly classified briefings, intercepts, and internal analytical products mathematically did not support the specific characterizations Schiff was actively broadcasting regarding direct evidence of coordination between the Trump campaign and Russian state actors. The system measures the precise atmospheric weight of this data packet. This specific document does not represent a standard disagreement between television pundits. It is not a localized cable panel squabble, and it is completely disconnected from right-wing optical attacks. It is the dry, unalterable institutional language of a security operative stationed directly inside Schiff's own structural system, formally notifying the target that his public narrative posture had completely outrun the verified physical record. The forensic lens isolates the absolute critical coordinate located at the extreme bottom margin of the paper. The system logs the presence of 3 specific handwritten words appended to the legal warning: stay on message. The Kin-Hien V-FAP-Lee forensic zoom algorithm pauses the chronological timeline to mathematically dissect the operational arrogance encoded within those 3 words. The system calculates the standard mechanical response of a normal biological subject. When verified physical evidence mathematically fails to support a public transmission, the operator automatically alters the transmission. However, the Washington operational architecture dictates an inverted physics. When the classified evidence structurally contradicts the approved optical message, the operator systematically attempts to change the meaning of the evidence to preserve the broadcast. The instruction to stay on message in the face of an internal legal warning mathematically proves that the public deception was not an accident. It was a highly managed, top-down structural command. The optical sensors record a measurable kinetic shift in the target. The acoustic frequency of Schiff's voice physically tightens. He systematically reaches for the singular defensive weapon still mathematically available to him. He attempts to question the physical validity of the document itself. He deploys a rapid sequence of acoustic transmissions designed to imply fabrication, attempting to turn the operational accusation outward so that the physical paper becomes the structural scandal rather than the documented conduct printed upon it. Vance mechanically intercepts this defensive maneuver by executing a highly disciplined pattern linking algorithm. He does not argue regarding the paper's origin. He systematically links the active document back to the previously established coordinates. He connects the fabricated television testimony from the red tab directly to the 41 public optical claims, binds them to the negative federal investigations, and locks them precisely into the internal warning currently resting on the table. He inputs a highly lethal acoustic observation directly into the record. Schiff structurally only utilizes the fabrication defense when he is mathematically not the operator holding the active microphone. This specific sentence lands with maximum physical impact because it systematically strips away the theatrical advantage that had optically protected the target for multiple years. The system tracks the exact moment the legal architecture surrounding Schiff completely collapses. Directly behind the target, the highly compensated lead defense attorney executes a physical shift. The optical feed confirms the operative no longer looks like a biological subject eager to verbally intervene on behalf of his client. The system logs the reality of the coordinate. At a specific mathematical point in a forensic audit, even the most expensive legal confidence must structurally recognize that the witness is no longer being actively questioned. He is being mechanically cornered by the absolute weight of his own physical record. Vance then systematically halts the physical extraction of documents from the tabs. He alters the operational parameters of the hearing by introducing a deeply personal acoustic metric. The system notes that personal testimony deployed within the Washington grid historically functions as fake currency artificial emotional packaging wrapped strictly around political ambition. However, Vance strips all emotional decoration from the data. He inputs the physical reality of his biological mother stationed in Middletown, explicitly detailing her localized mechanical deception regarding substance consumption. He mathematically refuses to ask for pity. He does not transform the coordinate into a political campaign advertisement, and he absolutely does not soften the acoustic space with a sentimental detour. He utilizes the data strictly to establish a rigid comparative baseline between private localized lies and public institutional deception. The contrast is mathematically vicious because it is structurally simple. Vance inputs the final calculation into the record. His mother's localized lies successfully destroyed exactly one biological family unit, but Schiff's institutional lies were systematically broadcast to exactly 330 million human subjects, successfully altering the operational course of an American presidency. Following this specific mathematical comparison, the forensic system confirms Schiff possesses absolutely zero clean physical lanes back to institutional dignity. The optical feed returns its focus to the specific physical coordinate located inches from the target's right hand, the untouched glass of water. The system logs the object's status. It remains completely available, harmless and ordinary, yet structurally unreachable. The target is mathematically paralyzed because every microscopic kinetic movement he executes now officially belongs to the 47 camera units. His prepared physical binder remains open. His polished phrases regarding transparency and accountability are still physically printed in clean lines, but the acoustic value of those words became mathematically obsolete before he ever possessed the opportunity to read them. Vance successfully completed this absolute destruction without requiring a single increase in his acoustic volume because the physical documents resting on the mahogany table were mechanically executing the shouting on his behalf. The forensic audit tracks the physical trajectory of Vice President J.D. Vance's hand, as it systematically bypasses the neutralized red and blue partitions, executing a direct mechanical engagement with the third secured coordinate inside the leather briefcase. The yellow tab, the optical and acoustic sensors register an immediate measurable degradation of the standard political theater inside room 226. The system logs that the operational subject has mathematically shifted away from the public matrix of cable news broadcasts and campaign rhetoric, crossing directly into a significantly colder, highly restricted structural environment. The incoming data packets now exclusively involve strict classification stamps, secured closed-door briefings, and the absolute physical machinery of the federal national security apparatus. Vance acoustically establishes this rigid boundary for the permanent record, explicitly noting the structural difference without deploying any theatrical escalation. He inputs the exact parameter. The previous tabs measured false alphanumeric sequences spoken directly into microphones and broadcast across television networks. The yellow tab, however, strictly measures the physical manipulation of sensitive information collected by biological subjects operating in highly dangerous, remote geographic coordinates, far removed from the safe marble architecture of Washington. The system logs this specific distinction as a severe moral framework that Senator Adam Schiff mathematically cannot escape through standard rhetorical fog. Once classified intelligence officially enters the acoustic space, the operational query is no longer whether a politician exaggerated for public optical applause, but whether immense institutional power was actively utilized to bend protected, classified data strictly toward a localized partisan objective. Vance mechanically extracts a specific physical document from the yellow partition. The forensic system notes that a declassified federal memorandum structurally possesses a vastly different atmospheric weight than a standard political press release. He initiates a direct read of the alphanumeric text into the live microphone. He logs the chronological timestamp of the event, the year 2017. He then establishes the exact biological origin of the incoming data. The source was mathematically not a hostile political commentator, not a campaign advertisement, and not a theoretical opponent. The source was a verified Democratic staff member permanently assigned to the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, possessing an active documented operational tenure exceeding a decade within the target's exact political ecosystem. According to the physical text of the FBI interview memorandum, this highly embedded staff operative formally reported to federal investigators that then Chairman Adam Schiff explicitly and systematically directed his internal committee staff to execute unauthorized physical leaks of classified intelligence. The internal directive explicitly ordered the release of specific data engineered to be derogatory toward President Donald Trump. The forensic system logs this singular sentence as a terminal structural breach, completely cutting through multiple chronological years of the target's polished television morality. The audit isolates the most mathematically damaging internal sequence recorded within the FBI document. The staffer explicitly transmitted an acoustic warning to the operational group, stating clearly that the directed conduct was structurally illegal. The recorded response from the secondary staff operators was mathematically not a cessation of the operation, nor was it a request for further legal review. The response was a direct acoustic reassurance that the unit would absolutely not be caught. The Kinheen v. Fapley forensic zoom algorithm flags this exact exchange for deep structural analysis. This specific data point exposes the absolute core mechanics of the institutional rot. It demonstrates a casual, systemic assumption within the target's operational perimeter that the primary problem was mathematically never whether highly classified material should be physically weaponized against a domestic target. The only operational variable they actively calculated was whether the personnel executing the leak could successfully evade the physical consequences of the law. The optical feed tracks Schiff's immediate kinetic and acoustic reaction to the deployment of the FBI memorandum. The target activates his microphone and answers rapidly, mathematically too quickly for a standard measured legal defense. He instantly deploys the oldest operational algorithm currently logged in the Institutional Survival Manual. He systematically attempts to place the biological source on trial before the external public can fully process the physical data the source provided. He outputs the specific alphanumeric labels, discredited and disgruntled, directly at the staff member. Vance executes a flawless mechanical intercept of this defensive algorithm. He cuts off the acoustic transmission by applying the correct institutional taxonomy to the biological subject. He explicitly states for the permanent record that Schiff is actively describing a whistleblower. The system logs the absolute structural devastation of this categorization. By utilizing that specific word, Vance mechanically forces the entire hearing room to directly confront the localized hypocrisy that the Washington apparatus systematically keeps tucked beneath the operational carpet. The forensic metric is perfectly binary. When a specific whistleblower outputs data that successfully assists the preferred political narrative, the Washington establishment immediately assigns them acoustic labels such as courage, conscience, and sacred duty. However, the exact microsecond a whistleblower physically points the data vector toward the wrong operational office, the exact same political entities systematically discover and deploy a secondary vocabulary matrix exclusively utilizing words like disgruntled, terminated, problematic, unreliable, and politically motivated. Vance mathematically locks Schiff into this exact contradiction, ensuring the target's character attack on the source permanently registers as a confirmed act of institutional panic. The forensic system maintains its absolute optical lock on the yellow tab parameters as Vice President J.D. Vance executes a highly calibrated shift in his evidentiary extraction. Having successfully deployed the FBI interview memorandum to establish the biological human origin of the intelligence leak allegations, he now systematically transitions to a purely mathematical verification model. The system logs that Vance is fundamentally restructuring the parameters of the accusation. He is mechanically framing the reporting of misconduct not as a standard partisan nuisance designed to be buried beneath character attacks against the whistleblower, but as a severe institutional breach requiring rigid forensic measurement. Vance's right hand extracts a secondary document from the yellow partition. The optical feed registers the format of this specific paper. It is mathematically not a narrative memorandum, not a legal advisory, and not a transcript. It is a highly structured, multi-column physical spreadsheet. The system logs that this specific category of evidence operates with absolute structural lethality because it fundamentally does not require any adjectives, emotional packaging, or theatrical delivery to execute its function. The chronological dates and physical numbers mathematically perform the structural damage independently. Vance introduces the precise architecture of the spreadsheet into the acoustic space of the hearing room. He maps the physical columns for the permanent record. Column A contains the exact chronological timestamps of highly classified closed-door Intelligence Committee sessions. Column B contains the exact chronological timestamps of published reports surfacing in the public media matrix containing the precise classified data discussed in those secured rooms. Column C contains the calculated mathematical time differentials between the events in Column A and Column B. The forensic system notes the absolute efficiency of this format. The operational pattern is stripped entirely of political speculation because the physical proximity of the dates speaks in an unalterable mathematical language that even the most highly compensated institutional spin doctors cannot successfully soften. Vance initiates a sequential acoustic read of the raw data pairings directly into the live microphone. The system records the exact chronological entries. He inputs the first coordinate, a closed-door intelligence session executed on February 14th, followed directly by a published media article surfacing on February 15th. He mathematically calculates the time differential for the room, exactly 19 chronological hours. He inputs the second coordinate, a closed-door intelligence session executed on March 1st, followed directly by a published optical report surfacing on March 2nd. He logs the differential, exactly 22 chronological hours. He inputs the third coordinate, a highly secured closed-door session executed on March 22nd, followed directly by a public media report surfacing on March 23rd. The differential is calculated and inputted, exactly 14 chronological hours. The acoustic transmission continues, logging more entries, more specific numerical pairings, and more localized physical overlaps between classified national security discussions and public optical reporting. The system tracks the structural weight of the sequence as it builds inside the room. Vance methodically reads until the sheer numerical volume mathematically becomes the primary operational point, and that specific point becomes structurally impossible for the target to ignore or bypass. Vance inputs the final macroscopic parameters of the spreadsheet. The physical document contains exactly 17 separate, verified data points. The calculated average time differential across the entire 17-point matrix is exactly 31 chronological hours. The forensic system logs Vance's analytical summary of this data. He explicitly states for the record that 17 distinct, highly synchronized data points with an average differential of 31 hours mathematically cannot be classified as a single operational coincidence floating loose within the political fog. He does not require a theatrical rise in acoustic volume, nor does he require physical outrage, because the rigid mathematical pattern executes the accusation with vastly superior precision. Vance translates the spreadsheet directly into common sense, stating acoustically that coincidence is strictly the alphanumeric vocabulary operators deploy when they mathematically refuse to utilize the word pattern. The system notes that common sense, when backed by a physical spreadsheet, represents the ultimate institutional threat because it is structurally harder to intimidate than standard technical jargon. The optical sensors immediately track Senator Adam Schiff's biological attempt to neutralize this mathematical grid. The target actively attempts to execute a strategic retreat directly into the comfort of official administrative conclusions. He activates his microphone and outputs a standard defensive sequence, acoustically claiming that the specific leak allegations had already been officially investigated and were legally found to be completely without merit. The Keen-Hien v. Fap-Lee forensic zoom algorithm immediately analyzes the structural integrity of this defense. The system logs that relying on internal administrative clearances possesses a stale mechanical vulnerability. It relies entirely on paperwork generated by the exact same political establishment that systematically investigates its own internal operations, just deeply enough to successfully declare its own investigative exhaustion. Vance intercepts this administrative retreat with a highly compressed three-word structural query. He inputs the following exact acoustic sequence into the microphone. Investigated by whom? The system logs the exact atmospheric mechanics of what follows. The query hangs in the physical space with absolute brutal simplicity. The mathematical reality governing the coordinate is absolute. Optical trust in a federal institution is structurally not restored merely by an operator acoustically reciting the name of the institution, particularly after the civilian public has already mathematically verified that the institution functions as compromised political terrain. Schiff attempts to process the query. The optical feed registers his physical presence at the table. The microphone remains fully active. The 47 camera units remain locked on his exact facial coordinates. The target mathematically fails to output an acoustic answer. The forensic chronometer immediately activates, measuring the absolute void in the acoustic space. The silence lasts for exactly 4 continuous chronological seconds. The system logs the structural devastation of this specific measurement. In a highly pressurized federal hearing room, 4 consecutive seconds of complete unforced acoustic vacuum mathematically inflict significantly more operational damage than another full paragraph of spoken testimony. The system records the final diagnostic of the yellow tab sequence. Within that exact 4-second void, the target's absolute physical silence mathematically functioned as a direct institutional confession currently wearing a suit. The forensic audit measures the exact dissipation of the 4-second acoustic vacuum inside room 226. Vice President J.D. Vance's right hand physically bypasses the yellow partition and engages the 4th secured coordinate stationed inside the leather briefcase. The green tab, the system logs a massive structural shift in the operational parameters of the hearing. Vance systematically drags the evidentiary focus away from the highly restricted, classified world of intelligence leaks and recenters the audit on a significantly simpler mathematical grid. The green tab structurally contains physical data that absolutely no civilian subject requires a federal security clearance, a Yale Law degree, or an elite committee title to process. The system classifies the incoming data packets as localized civil paperwork, physical property deeds, banking mortgages, sworn personal certifications, and alphanumeric signatures. Vance initiates the extraction sequence by laying a highly specific sequence of physical documents onto the mahogany desk. He systematically inputs the parameters of the Potomac, Maryland home directly into the acoustic record. He logs the exact verified purchase price, the specific architectural structure of the Fannie Mae backed mortgage, the calculated interest rate, and the critical legal baseline. Senator Adam Schiff's repeated sworn physical certification that this specific Maryland property mathematically functioned as his absolute primary residence. The system logs that this certification was absolutely not a singular clerical slip. It was a deliberate structural mechanism deployed across multiple chronological refinancing applications over the span of several years. Vance immediately places a secondary physical document directly beside the Maryland paperwork. He introduces the Burbank, California condominium. He inputs the verified alphanumeric text from Schiff's California property tax filings. The document mathematically confirms that Schiff was actively claiming the state-sanctioned homeowner's exemption tied explicitly to that California property, certifying it to the regional tax assessor as his absolute primary residence. The Keen-Hien v. Fap-Lee forensic zoom algorithm immediately calculates the absolute contradiction of this geographic and financial geometry. The physical reality stops sounding like an abstract political debate and becomes embarrassingly simple to process. The target legally transmitted one set of alphanumeric data to a banking institution in Maryland and simultaneously transmitted a completely contradictory set of alphanumeric data to a tax assessor in California. He maintained this dual certification architecture while physically representing the state of California within the United States Congress and simultaneously broadcasting optical lectures to the civilian public regarding the sacred nature of institutional accountability. The forensic system logs Vance's methodology for maximizing the structural damage of this data. He mathematically recognizes that no volume of highly polished Yale legal vocabulary can successfully render this specific contradiction elegant. A biological subject may legally own multiple physical properties and travel between distinct state coordinates, but that subject absolutely cannot honestly certify two separate geographic locations as the exact same primary home strictly to generate an optimized financial advantage. Vance bypasses standard political rhetoric and anchors this contradiction directly to a civilian sociological metric. He explicitly references the biological subjects stationed in Middletown, a localized mechanic, a regional nurse, a small business operator, a coal miner, a cashier, or a commercial truck driver. The system logs this specific acoustic transmission as the exact coordinate where the hearing permanently ceases to be exclusively about Schiff and structurally transforms into a documented audit of the elite double standard. Vance mathematically maps the reality. Any civilian biological subject operating entirely outside the protective shielding of elite political networks would absolutely never be permitted to transform legally binding mortgage language into a philosophical discussion regarding the definition of residency. They would mechanically receive federal forms, hostile phone calls, severe financial penalties, and potential prosecution, with absolutely no sympathetic cable television panels available to explain away the anomaly. To permanently bridge the gap between theoretical hypocrisy and prosecutable conduct, Vance inputs a specific historical legal precedent into the record. He formally introduces the name Marilyn Mosby. He logs her exact structural status, a biological subject who received a verified federal conviction tied explicitly to deploying false statements on a standard mortgage application. The system logs the absolute parity of the comparison. It utilizes the exact same basic banking system, the exact same kind of sworn physical certification, and the exact same core legal query regarding primary residency. Yet one operator faced severe federal charges while Schiff systematically moved upward through the American political apparatus as if federal regulations functioned merely as a security checkpoint reserved strictly for other passengers. The green tab sequence reaches maximum lethality when Vance physically extracts the final document, an internal email transmission originating from the target's financial advisor. The system analyzes the alphanumeric text of this email. It mathematically eliminates any residual defense based on biological confusion, administrative oversight, or vague accidental filing errors buried within bureaucratic clutter. The physical document explicitly outlines a calculated awareness of benefit. It contains a verified savings calculation. It explicitly provides a financial reason to systematically maintain the dual residency arrangement. Vance acoustically reads the exact numerical yield inputted by the advisor, an estimated annual savings of approximately $11,200. The forensic system zeroes in on this specific metric. Vance structurally confirms that $11,000 is absolutely not a rounding error for the civilian subjects he previously invoked. It is not an irrelevant accounting footnote, and it is mathematically not the volume of capital a normal family simply forgets exists. For a standard civilian household attempting to survive one bad chronological month without experiencing catastrophic economic failure, $11,000 represents absolute biological breathing room. The system notes that the precise class of political operators who routinely lecture the American public regarding civic sacrifice and institutional integrity always seem to structurally discover a highly private, optimized exception the exact microsecond the federal rule touches their personal wallet. The optical feed immediately registers a physical breach of protocol. Schiff's lead defense attorney attempts to execute a kinetic rise from his seated coordinate. The operative attempts to forcefully insert a familiar defensive sentence into the acoustic space, aiming to state that his client had mathematically never been charged with a crime. The system classifies this specific intervention as the standard mechanical response lawyers deploy when the structural moral argument has completely fled the room. Vance mathematically intercepts the physical movement. He does not deploy acoustic heat, he does not execute a theatrical tantrum, and he absolutely does not raise his vocal volume. With the steady, rigid authority of an auditor maintaining total control of the environment, Vance issues a direct command instructing the counsel to physically sit down. He reminds the room that the witness is an active United States senator who retains the biological capacity to speak for himself or structurally choose not to. The optical sensors log the result. The defense attorney mechanically complies and sits down. The system records that this specific minor downward kinetic movement mathematically broadcasts significantly more damage than the attempted verbal objection. The highly choreographed architecture of Schiff's legal defense had structurally broken, and every camera unit in the room successfully captured the failure. The forensic lens isolates Senator Adam Schiff. His optical sensors are rigidly locked onto the physical affidavit resting on the table. He is physically staring directly at his own alphanumeric signature. The system logs that a signature appears entirely harmless when applied in private, but structurally transforms into radioactive material when placed under public lighting directly next to competing financial claims. The target's physical pen remains completely motionless. The untouched water glass stationed inches from his hand remains exactly where it had been from the start of the chronological sequence, close enough to physically reach, yet structurally too dangerous to engage without displaying kinetic panic. The system seals the green tab coordinate, logging that Schiff's prepared defense statement has now mathematically transitioned from an active operational plan into a useless relic from a timeline that no longer physically exists. The forensic audit enters its terminal phase as Vice President J.D. Vance's hand physically engages the fifth and final partition stationed inside the leather briefcase. The white tab. The optical sensors record a permanent alteration in the atmospheric pressure of room 226. By this specific chronological coordinate, the biological subjects occupying the hearing room mathematically no longer process each newly extracted document as a theatrical surprise. The system logs that the physical papers are now strictly viewed as sequential interlocking sections of an unyielding institutional structure that is systematically closed around Senator Adam Schiff with the slow, crushing pressure of a federal vault door. Vance acoustically announces that exactly 2 operational matters remain and inputs a verbal parameter stating he will be brief. The system classifies this acoustic transmission as structurally cruel because absolutely nothing regarding the hearing's current operational state registers as brief to the target, his paralyzed defense attorneys, or the media operatives watching a multi-year optical reputation being systematically disassembled document by document. Vance extracts the first physical component of the white tab, the verified documentation of the 2017 acoustic transmission involving Russian radio comedians. He logs the exact parameters of the operational prank into the record. Schiff's internal office apparatus mathematically believed they were actively communicating with a Ukrainian political official offering compromising, highly derogatory material targeting President Donald Trump. The forensic system zeroes in on the absolute contradiction of this coordinate. Schiff, the exact biological operator who subsequently commanded an entire federal impeachment apparatus framed explicitly around the illegality of foreign interference and the solicitation of political dirt, had systematically entertained an active acoustic link with foreign operators offering that exact identical commodity. Schiff attempts a minor kinetic defense, acoustically claiming the unauthorized communication had been properly reported to the appropriate federal authorities. Vance immediately pins the chronological timeline of that specific action. The report was mathematically executed strictly after the communication became public knowledge, not prior to the exposure. The system logs the structural difference for the record. Executing a report after public optical exposure is mathematically classified as damage control cleanup, not institutional conscience. Vance then systematically shifts the acoustic parameters to the final, heaviest physical document resting inside the white partition, the Ed Buck ledger. The system logs that the operational environment violently shifts away from abstract political transcripts, localized mortgage forms, and cable news stunts, dropping directly into the severe physical reality of deceased biological subjects, actively ignored safety warnings, and highly compromised donor capital. Vance methodically reads the sequential data into the microphone. The receipt of the financial donation, the verified physical deaths of Gemmel Moore and Timothy Dean, the physical escape of Dane Brown, and the resulting arrest, indictment, and 30-year federal sentence of the donor. Schiff's acoustic output visibly fractures. His voice physically cracks as he insists into the microphone that his office had systematically redirected every single cent of that specific capital to charity. The Keen Hien V-FAP-Lee forensic zoom algorithm immediately analyzes this acoustic crack, logging it as the first visible mechanical failure in the highly polished public instrument Schiff had spent years tuning for federal cameras. Vance mathematically acknowledges the charitable transfer, but instantly redirects the audit to the chronological timeline of the transaction. He physically extracts an internal office recommendation dated August 2017. According to the alphanumeric text, an internal staffer explicitly advised redirecting the compromised contribution immediately following the discovery of the first deceased biological subject. Vance reads the handwritten executive response, physically scrawled across that exact document. Not yet, wait for the cycle to pass. The forensic system freezes this specific alphanumeric sequence for absolute structural analysis. The instruction to wait for the cycle to pass mathematically possesses zero connection to moral confusion, due process, or careful administrative responsibility. It is the rigid, mechanical language of elite political weather management. It translates into a strict operational algorithm. Pause kinetic action until the optical cameras physically relocate. Wait until the civilian public's memory buffer clears. Wait until the deceased subject's name loses thermal heat. And wait until the capital can be mechanically transferred without generating a severe optical cost. Vance inputs the final terminal calculation. Schiff mathematically executed the charitable transfer strictly after the second biological body was discovered, permanently shrinking the target's defense from an act of moral conscience to an act of delayed damage control. The optical sensors log that the hearing room has achieved a state of absolute kinetic stillness. The standard machinery of Washington reaction, the whispered staff communications, the typing, the performative outrage has systematically shut down. Vance Physical closes the white tab. He places it directly on top of the others. The optical feed registers the final physical architecture resting on the mahogany desk: red, blue, yellow, green, and white. A color-coded stack of paper that mathematically functions as an unalterable structural verdict. The two brass clasps of the leather briefcase mechanically click shut, echoing through the acoustic space and permanently closing the institutional trap. Vance delivers the macroscopic summary. He does not execute a theatrical scream, but simply translates the raw data packets into the exact optical reality the civilian public will process. He explicitly lists the verified pattern: a subject who claimed proof of treason without delivering physical evidence, a subject who fabricated television testimony, a subject accused of weaponizing classified intelligence, a subject who executed contradictory sworn financial documents, a subject who waited out a lethal donor scandal, and a subject who entertained foreign political dirt. Vance applies the final structural label, a pattern of fabrication. He formally turns to the acting committee chairman and acoustically transmits that he has absolutely no further queries. The forensic system isolates Senator Adam Schiff. The optical feed registers his physical mouth opening. The acoustic sensors register an absolute total vacuum. No sound mathematically exits his biological vocal apparatus. He is structurally trapped between the useless, prepared statements physically resting in front of him and the completely ruined institutional credibility stacked directly across the room. The lines printed in his binder regarding transparency and public trust remain patiently on the page, mathematically obsolete. Schiff executes his final physical maneuver. He mechanically closes the useless binder, elevates his physical mass from the witness chair, and completely bypasses the main architectural entrance where the media network awaits. He systematically executes a retreat through the secondary side door, the restricted service, exit traditionally utilized by biological subjects attempting to disappear from an optical coordinate without verbally admitting to the disappearance. The heavy wooden door physically seals behind him with a small administrative click. Vance stands, successfully extracts his closed briefcase, executes a physical handshake with the chairman, and exits through the primary doorway, maintaining the exact same mechanical calm he utilized to enter the room. The Kinheen v. Fap-Lee forensic zoom algorithm tracks the subsequent external transmission of the data. The raw optical clip rapidly bypasses the Washington media spin cycle, penetrating directly into the civilian matrix. The system logs specific geographic coordinates, a commercial truck cabin in West Virginia, a localized dry cleaning operation in Glendale, and a quiet study carrel in Ohio. Civilian subjects Danny Watkins, Patricia Kim, and Marcus Williams physically process the optical data. The system records that they do not require expert political operatives to annotate the anomaly. They mathematically recognize the exact structural silence of an elite operator who has finally collided with unalterable physical receipts. The audit permanently terminates back inside the geographic coordinate of room 226. The overhead lighting grid is mechanically powered down. The floor has been systematically cleared. The optical feed captures a single forgotten physical artifact abandoned directly beneath the primary witness table, a single printed page titled Transparency, Accountability, and the Sacred Trust of Public Service. The system seals the master file. The calculation is complete.